What kind of daughter bans her own father from her wedding? That was the question echoing in my mind long before I heard the words spoken out loud. A question no parent ever imagines they'll have to ask. A question that burns even before you know the answer. Most stories about fathers and daughters begin with warmth. Mine begins with a train ride and a quiet heartbreak I never imagined would grow claws. My name is Arthur Hale, 68 years old, retired railway engineer, and a man who has lived a simple, honest life in the quiet seaside town of Scarborough, North Yorkshire. My days are predictable. Early walks by the shore, tea at the same cafe, repairing old clocks in my small living room. Nothing extravagant, nothing impressive, just a life built on small routines and the memories of those I've loved and lost. But today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be joyful. Today, my daughter, my only child, Emily Hale, was getting married. I woke before sunrise, heart pounding with the kind of nervous excitement a father feels when he's about to watch his little girl step into a new life. I ironed my best shirt twice just to make sure no crease dared to show. Put on the only suit I owned, navy blue, slightly faded, sleeves a bit too long, but made me feel dignified enough to stand among the important people Emily now surrounded herself with. I caught the earliest train to Manchester. The rhythm of the tracks beneath me felt comforting, familiar, like the heartbeat of an old friend. I spent 40 years working on railway systems, building, inspecting, repairing, and trains have always felt like home. So I sat by the window, watching the landscape change. The rolling fields, the distant farmhouses, the slow shift from countryside to city. And the entire journey, one thought pulsed through me. I hope she smiles when she sees me. Her mother used to have that same smile, the kind that softened everything in the world. Emily lost her mother when she was 11. A car accident. Sudden, cruel. And from that moment, it had been just us. A tired engineer who didn't know how to braid hair and a grieving little girl who cried into his chest at night. I worked overtime, learned how to cook more than beans on toast, saved every spare pound to send her to good schools. I watched her grow, change, become someone I was proud of with every bone in my body. She was my purpose, my joy, my reason to stay strong. So when she got engaged 6 months ago to a polished young man named Nathan Whitford, I smiled through the worry that maybe, just maybe, she was drifting into a world I didn't belong to. But love means letting go a little. I was ready to let go, just not to be pushed away. Rosebridge Manor was more castle than venue. Stone pillars, marble fountains, gates taller than any house on my street. Luxury cars glided past me, sleek, tinted windows, drivers in gloves. Guests stepped out, wearing suits worth more than my yearly pension, dresses that shimmered like sea spray. I tightened my grip on the small envelope in my pocket, my handwritten letter for Emily. A father's last words before she started her new life. Not dramatic, not poetic, just love. Then I approached the security checkpoint. The guard was young, heavy-built, wearing a headset. He barely looked at me at first, just grabbed his tablet and asked for my name. Arthur Hale. I answered, smiling even though he hadn't smiled once. He tapped, scrolled, paused, his eyebrows knit together. Hale, you said? Arthur Hale. Yes. I chuckled nervously, father of the bride. Another tap, a longer pause. Then he frowned. Sorry, sir, your name's not on the list. I felt the first crack. Could you check again, please? He did. Then he looked at me, and something cold slipped into his voice. No, sir. It's not just missing. It's been removed. Removed. Cut out. As if someone took a knife to my name. I don't understand, I said quietly. There must be a mistake. I reached into my coat and pulled out the invitation. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, my name printed crystal clear. Emily had mailed it to me herself. The guard actually laughed. A small, disrespectful breath of disbelief. Sir, he said, shaking his head, the bride gave direct orders. You're not to be allowed in. She and the groom both confirmed it. His words didn't just land, they crushed. The bride said that. My voice felt thin, breakable. Yes, sir. Her and the groom. Strict instructions. The wind lifted the edges of my jacket. Somewhere behind the gate, I heard music, soft violins warming up. Guests chatting. A woman's laugh. Life continuing, as if my world hadn't just been ripped in half. I'm her father, I said, as if reminding him would magically open the gates. Her only parent. He shrugged. Not my call. No apology. No sympathy. Just dismissal. One of the luxury cars rolled up behind me. The guard immediately straightened, posture perfect, and waved it through while I stepped aside like an inconvenience. The tinted window lowered just enough for me to see elegantly dressed guests glance in my direction. I recognized none of them, but they looked at me like I didn't belong, like I was exactly where I should be, outside. Each car that passed made the shame worse. Each burst of laughter from inside the estate felt like another slap. My daughter, my Emily, had banned me from the happiest day of her life, and she hadn't even told me herself. I stood there for minutes that felt like hours. My hands trembled. My throat burned with humiliation, not because I cared about the guests, not because of the guard, but because I couldn't stop wondering, why will my daughter do this? The girl who used to run into my arms after school. The girl who whispered secrets to me that she told no one else. The girl I raised from broken pieces after her mother died. What reason could ever justify erasing me? Unless someone wanted me gone. Someone wanted me far away. Someone who knew something I didn't. A memory surfaced. Emily's last phone call, 3 weeks before the wedding. Short, rushed, distant. She spoke like someone watching their words, like someone reading from a script. Dad, everything's just busy right now. I'll call again soon. She never did. At the time, I thought she was simply overwhelmed. Weddings were stressful. Plans piled up. People changed. Life moved. But standing at those gates, watching strangers flow into my daughter's new world while I was left behind, it didn't feel like stress anymore. It felt intentional, calculated, cruel. And cruelty wasn't like Emily. Not unless someone had pushed her into a corner. Then the guard received a message through his headset. He glanced at me again, this time with an unease he tried to hide. Sir, he said quietly, I'd leave if I were you. There's no point in staying. Leave? Walk away from my own daughter's wedding like a trespasser? But humiliation has a voice, and it whispers the loudest when you're hurting. Go, before someone else sees you. So I stepped back, turned away, walked slowly down the gravel path that led back to the road. I didn't cry, not yet, but as the music from inside swelled, a symphony celebrating a moment I was denied, I felt something shift inside me. Something heavy, something sharp. Hurt does that. It changes shape until it becomes a question you can't stop trying to answer. Why had Emily removed me? What had Nathan told her? What secret was being buried so deeply that even a father had to be cut out? I didn't know then. Not yet. But the truth, the one Emily never knew, was already on its way to the surface. And when it reached her, when it tore open the lies she had been fed, this wedding would never be the same again. Because secrets don't stay buried, especially the ones powerful enough to break a family apart. And I was about to discover that the reason I was banned was the very reason everything was about to explode. 0. How do you stay a father to someone who slowly learns to blame you for every ache she carries? That question haunted me long before Emily ever said the words out loud. Long before grief hardened into something colder. Long before another man walked into her life and began reshaping the pieces of her heart I once held. To understand why my daughter eventually turned her back on me, you must understand what came before, what we survived, and what we failed to survive together. Emily and I weren't always fractured. We were once inseparable. When she was little, she used to follow me everywhere, into the shed where I tinkered with old radios, down to the beach where we skimmed stones, even to the railway depot on days when childcare collapsed, and I had no choice but to bring her along. The men there adored her. She'd sit on overturned crates, swinging her legs, watching us work on engines with bright curiosity. Her mother, Margaret, was the gentle balance between us. A schoolteacher with soft hands and a voice that could quiet storms. She loved us with a kindness that felt endless. But looking back, endless things still run out. The day everything fell apart. I remember the phone call. I remember the silence after it. I remember the sound Emily made, the kind of sound no human should ever have to make when they're told a parent is never coming home again. My wife died in a motorway accident. But what the world called an accident was something darker underneath. Margaret had been slipping into a depression I didn't see. Or maybe I saw it, but not early enough, not clearly enough, not in the way a husband is supposed to. She hid her sadness behind soft smiles, behind volunteering at the school, behind making Emily's packed lunches with little handwritten notes. She hid it so well that when she drove out that morning, I didn't know she was carrying a storm inside her. When the truth emerged, when doctors hinted that perhaps she shouldn't have been driving in that state, I felt something inside me break. A guilt that never healed. a regret that dug into my ribs and never left. And Emily, she was 13, old enough to understand death, but too young to understand how grief rearranges the world. In the weeks that followed, she clung to me. She slept in my room. She cried into my chest at night. She asked me if her mother suffered, if she said anything, if she had been scared. I answered every question the way a father does, with honesty where I could, gentleness where I couldn't. But grief is a slow poison. It changes shape. It finds new targets. As months turned into years, Emily didn't just mourn her mother. She began to rewrite her memories around the pain. And in that rewriting, I slowly became the villain of her story. You worked too much. You didn't notice she was struggling. You were supposed to protect her. You didn't save her. Every accusation came from a place of hurt. She was not cruel. She was drowning. But words spoken in grief have sharp edges. And over time, those edges severed the bond we once had. Still, I never blamed her. How could I? She had lost her center. She was trying to place the weight somewhere. And I let her. I carried every ounce of guilt because part of me believed I deserved it. The day Oliver entered the picture, Emily met Oliver Ward when she was 14. Far too young to notice danger. Far too impressionable to understand the power of a flattering voice. He was the older brother of her best friend, Amelia. Charming, wealthy, educated in private London schools. He walked with confidence that felt like a spotlight. He saw Emily's grief not as a wound, but as an opening. It started small. Compliments, encouragement, advice about school, about her future, about becoming someone bigger. He told her she deserved a grand life, a beautiful life, a life of influence and luxury, a life far away from Scarborough. Scarborough, our home, our memories, our little seaside world, became something he mocked without ever saying the word mock. He called it quiet, simple, limited. He said it the way city men say provincial, with a smile, but a condescending one. And Emily, desperate for escape, clung to every word. By 16, she was talking about London, about careers bigger than our town could offer, about people who understood her dreams. I supported her, of course. I'd always support her, but something in her tone changed. The warmth softened. The distance widened. One day, when she was 17, we had the argument that scarred us both. I had reminded her to focus on school, to think about universities based on her passions, not based on glamour or status. I said it gently, lovingly. She stared at me, eyes glassy with old resentment and newfound defiance. Maybe Oliver is right, she whispered. Maybe I don't need to be tied to a small seaside man with a small seaside life. I froze. Those words, they weren't hers. They were his. Emily saw the hurt in my face. But instead of taking it back, she doubled down. I don't want to be like this, she said. Stuck. Limited. Surviving instead of living. She wanted more. More than I had. More than her mother ever got the chance to have. And what father could blame her for that? But her ambition wasn't the problem. The problem was the way Oliver shaped it. Subtly. Cleverly. Like a craftsman molding clay. He built a version of Emily who believed that anything imperfect, simple, or ordinary was something to escape. And I, her father, her history, her anchor, became part of that escape. Even then, I never stopped loving her. I never stopped trying. Birthdays, calls, messages, even when she grew distant, even when she rolled her eyes at my old-fashioned ways, even when she started treating me like a relic. But something in her heart was shifting, falling into a mold someone else had designed, and I didn't know how to pull her back. The secret she never knew. People think parents tell their children everything. They don't. Sometimes because they want to protect them. Sometimes because the truth is too complicated. And sometimes because the truth hurts more than the lies. Emily never knew why Margaret was driving on a motorway that morning. She never knew where her mother was coming from, or what she had been carrying in the passenger seat when she crashed. And I had never told her. For years, I kept that truth buried deep, thinking silence was kindness. But silence has a way of building pressure, and the pressure was about to explode, because the very secret I kept to protect Emily was the same secret that someone else had discovered. someone who planned to use it, someone who wanted me far away from her wedding. And as I stood at the gates earlier that day, banned and humiliated, I didn't yet realize the truth. The reason Emily turned her back on me wasn't just grief. It wasn't just influence. It wasn't just ambition. It was because someone had told her a version of my past. One twisted just enough to make her doubt the only person who had ever stood in her corner. And the part she didn't know, the part only you now know, was about to tear her entire perfect world apart. Because secrets kept in love become weapons in the wrong hands. And mine was already loaded. The spark was lit, and Emily had no idea the fire was about to reach her. What if the man trying to destroy you isn't evil, just desperate? That question matters here, because Oliver Ward wasn't a monster born out of darkness. He was carved by the world he came from, sharpened by expectations, and driven by a fear so deep it turned everything he touched into strategy. And Emily, my Emily, never saw the blade beneath his charm. Most stories paint villains as heartless, wicked creatures. But real villains? They're often people who believe they're right. Oliver Ward believed he was right about everything. The boy born in a world of silver. Oliver grew up in Kensington, where children didn't play in parks. They were escorted to etiquette classes, violin lessons, and international summer programs. His world was polished silver. Fine dining, tailored suits, prep schools, legacy names. Money wasn't earned, it flowed. Comfort wasn't appreciated, it was expected. He was groomed for success before he even knew what the word meant. He learned early, long before adulthood, that power commanded respect, and the powerful did not mingle with the ordinary. So when he looked at me, Arthur Hale, a retired railway engineer with hands rough from decades of tools, he didn't see a man. He saw a weight, a liability, an anchor tied to the ankles of the life he wanted to build. He believed power demands perfection. Image is everything. Weakness slows you down. Emotion distracts you. And people like me, quiet, ordinary, plain, are anchors that sink great futures. Those were his values. Cold, sharpened, polished like steel. He didn't yell, didn't bark orders, didn't insult outright. Oliver used soft tones and clever word choices, violence disguised as elegance. His cruelty had purpose. His motives had structure. And Emily, she mistook his certainty for stability, his control for love. Because Oliver's kind of influence doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like guidance, direction, a gentle hand leading you upward. Emily, still carrying the invisible cracks of grief, was easy prey for a man who offered structure, order, prestige. She thought he saw her potential. In truth, he saw opportunity. How he reshaped my daughter. Oliver never told Emily to abandon me directly. That would have exposed the ugliness. Instead, he planted ideas slowly, like seeds he watered over months. Your father is kind, of course, but he doesn't understand the world you're entering. You'll outgrow Scarborough M. You already have, really. It's not his fault. He's just limited. You deserve to rise without apologizing. Emily wasn't unkind by nature. She wasn't cold. But Oliver fed her insecurities like fuel. Her longing for escape, for a bigger life, for approval. It all became ammunition. And Oliver fired it with precision. He made her feel guilty for wanting more. Then made her feel powerful for choosing it. Then made her feel ashamed of anything that reminded her of her old life. Including me. I watched it happen piece by piece. The softer tone when she talked to him. The colder tone when she talked to me. The hesitation when I asked about her life. The defensiveness when Oliver's name came up. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't rejection. It was transformation. One carefully engineered by a man who believed people were meant to be shaped, not loved. Part of me wanted to hate him. But another part, the tired part, the honest part, understood him. He wasn't cruel for fun. He was cruel for survival. The truth the audience learns first. Now here's where the story shifts, where the curiosity deepens, where you, watching this unfold, will learn something Emily never sees coming. Oliver Ward wasn't rich anymore. Not even close. His family's decline didn't make headlines, but it destroyed their world. 2 years ago, the Wards were slammed with a devastating lawsuit involving fraudulent investments tied to his father's business partners. They lost their homes. Their assets were frozen. Their reputation, once untouchable, was dragged publicly through the mud. And Oliver, who had been raised on power and image, found himself stripped of both. But he didn't tell anyone. Not Emily. Not her friends. Not a single person on her side of the world. He rented better shoes than he owned, borrowed cars, wore one tailored suit and cycled it, pretending he owned 10 more. He spoke with money he no longer had. He played the role of the polished fiancé flawlessly, hiding the cracks beneath designer cologne. Because the truth was simple. Oliver was drowning in debt. Personal debt, family debt, legal debt. He was a man standing on the edge of collapse, holding together a facade with the last of his pride. And in that desperation, he searched for a lifeline. He didn't find love. He found Emily Hale. She was beautiful, ambitious, impressionable, but more importantly, Oliver believed she was his ticket back into a life where he wouldn't have to kneel to anyone. And then he heard my name. He believed I was poor, a small man with a small pension, living on the coast with nothing to offer. He believed cutting me out would remove an embarrassment from his image. He thought removing me was cleaning the dirt from his perfect white shirt. If only he knew why he needed Emily. Oliver didn't marry Emily for companionship. He didn't marry her for happiness. He didn't marry her for love. He married her because she was a last chance wrapped in soft edges. Emily was building a thriving career in digital strategy. She had connections, growing influence, and far more financial potential than she realized. Oliver saw that potential, measured it, weighed it, calculated it. To him, Emily wasn't a bride. She was an investment, a long-term asset, a stabilizer, a way to rebuild the life he lost. He groomed her not to feel loved, but to feel dependent on him, because dependency meant loyalty. Loyalty meant predictability. Predictability meant control. And control was the one thing Oliver Ward could not live without. The cliffhanger the father doesn't see coming. Oliver dismissed me because he assumed I had nothing. Nothing to offer. Nothing to lose. Nothing that could possibly threaten him. To him, I was just the old man in cheap shoes. The past. The background. The inconvenience. He underestimated me. Because what Oliver didn't know, what Emily didn't know, what the world didn't know, was this. I was not poor. Not by a mile. Not even close. For 20 years after Margaret's death, I had invested quietly, smartly, consistently, through railway shares, property, and a venture few people in Scarborough even knew existed. I had built something, not for myself, but for Emily. A safety net, a future, a legacy, a fortune hidden in humility. A truth that, once revealed, would shatter Oliver's carefully constructed world and expose the real reason someone wanted me far away from that wedding. The villain thought he was hunting money. He had no idea he was hunting the wrong target. And the real explosion, the one that would burn through lies, illusions, and manipulation, was only just beginning. What if the greatest danger isn't the lie someone tells you, but the truth they hide? Every father carries a secret or two, not out of deceit, but out of protection. Some secrets are small, some are harmless. And then there are secrets like mine, ones heavy enough to shift the fate of an entire family. The truth beneath an ordinary life. For decades, people thought they knew me. Arthur Hale, retired railway engineer. Worn jackets, old boots, gentle smile. A man who lived simply in a modest seaside house where the paint faded faster than my memories. They weren't wrong. At least, not entirely. I did work in railways. I did live quietly. I did let the world forget me. But the part no one ever saw, the part even Emily never glimpsed, was that I wasn't living quietly because I lacked ambition or opportunity. I lived quietly because grief drove me into the shadows. What Emily didn't know was that, years before her mother died, I had been more than an engineer tightening bolts and checking brakes. I was an inventor, a problem solver, a man obsessed with preventing tragedies. Back when Emily was still in primary school, the UK faced a string of railway accidents during fog-heavy seasons, collisions caused by low visibility, faulty signals, and poor weather communication. It rattled the whole industry. It rattled me more than most. I couldn't bear the thought of families receiving phone calls like the one that would later shatter my own life. So I worked, night after night, shift after shift. While Emily slept, while Margaret graded papers at the kitchen table, I tinkered with prototypes in the small shed behind our house. It took years, hundreds of failures, and more stubbornness than genius. But eventually, I built something worth noticing. A railway safety sensor that could detect approaching trains through fog, rain, or mechanical signal errors. An early warning technology that saved seconds, and in railways, seconds meant everything. A large transportation firm bought the patent for £5 million. I still remember the day the check arrived. Margaret cried from pride. Emily was too young to understand the weight of the number, but hugged me because her mother did. We had dreams then, travels, a bigger home, a future brighter than the North Sea sunrise. But life has a cold way of rearranging dreams. Wealth means nothing when the heart shatters. After the accident that took Margaret from us, that £5 million turned from a blessing into a burden. Money couldn't bring her back. Money couldn't answer Emily's questions at night. Money couldn't heal the guilt that lived inside me like a parasite feeding on my ribs. I didn't touch the account, didn't expand the house, didn't upgrade the car. I shut the world out. And wealth, real wealth, doesn't like to be kept hidden. It attracts attention, questions, motives. So I built a private trust, tucked away legally, quietly, invisibly. I placed all £5 million into it, let the interest grow, and buried the existence of it under layers of privacy. Then I did something that many would call foolish. I let myself look poor. Not pathetic, not destitute, just ordinary. I wore the same jackets, kept the same small home, lived on my pension, walked to the shops instead of driving, fixed things instead of buying replacements, stayed under every radar, because wealth brings vultures. And I had already lost the one person I would have shared everything with. So I lived small, because living big felt insulting without her. Why I never told my daughter. People assume parents keep secrets out of shame or selfishness. But I kept my secret out of fear. Fear that Emily, young, grieving, open-wounded, would cling to the wrong hands if she knew money was waiting for her. Fear that she'd be targeted, manipulated, used. Fear that someone like Oliver would appear long before I ever knew his name. Emily was 9 when the check arrived, 13 when her mother died, 14 when she met Oliver, 16 when she began to drift away, 17 when she told me she wanted a bigger life. How could I tell her then? How could I tell a girl still learning how to breathe through grief that she was heir to a fortune? She would have trusted the wrong friend, the wrong lover, the wrong influencer. She would have been surrounded by people who liked the number in her future more than the heart in her chest. So I kept silent. Let her grow without the shadow of money behind her. Let her learn what relationships look like when wealth isn't part of the equation. I thought, naively, that secrecy would shield her. I didn't realize the real danger wasn't Emily's knowledge of the fortune. It was someone else's knowledge. Someone cunning, desperate, dangerously strategic. Someone who wanted access not to Emily's love, but to Emily's inheritance. The day Oliver discovered my truth, I still don't know who told him. A former colleague? A banker who slipped too much information? A relative who pieced something together from old headlines? All I know is this. Oliver learned about my private trust long before Emily did. Imagine his reaction. A man drowning in debt. A man maintaining an illusion of wealth by clawing at the edges of a collapsing life. A man terrified of returning to the obscurity he was raised to despise. And suddenly, he hears that the poor father of his girlfriend is secretly sitting on a fortune. A fortune that would, by law, become Emily's one day. A fortune that could erase the debts that choked him, save his reputation, restore the image he worshipped like a god. In that moment, Emily stopped being a partner and became a lifeline. And I, quiet, harmless Arthur Hale, became a threat. Not because I opposed him, not because we fought, not because I rejected him, but because I existed. I represented oversight, obstacle, unpredictability, and, worst of all, I had the power to expose his financial ruin. So Oliver formed a plan. Not emotional, not impulsive, but calculated, systematic, cold. He needed to isolate Emily. He needed her dependent only on him. He needed her convinced her father was either irrelevant or harmful. And he needed me far away from the wedding. Why? Because weddings come with legal documents, joint finances, merging futures. He couldn't risk me stepping forward. He couldn't risk me speaking. He couldn't risk Emily learning the truth before the ink dried on a marriage certificate. So he used influence, used insecurity, used charm sharpened into manipulation. And he succeeded. At least, so he thought. The terrifying realization. Standing outside Rosebridge Manor, barred by security, humiliated in front of luxury cars and strangers, I thought my daughter had simply abandoned me. I believed it was her choice, her cruelty, her resentment. But now, as the truth unfolded like a slow, dreadful dawn, I understood something far darker. Emily didn't ban me from the wedding. Oliver did, and she didn't see it for what it was. Not protection, not preference, not punishment. Strategy. Strategy to remove the one person who could blow his entire illusion to pieces. Strategy to isolate his target. Strategy to secure his financial future. Strategy to ensure Emily stepped into a marriage blinded by love and bound by secrets. The wealth I hid, the silence I thought would protect her, had become the very weapon used to trap her. And the man she thought she was marrying for love was marrying her for survival. Oliver didn't just want my daughter. He wanted my legacy, and he would have sacrificed anything, even her happiness, to get it. The game had already begun, and the next move would not be his. Have you ever watched a man try to hold his whole world together with a smile, only to see that smile slide off his face, piece by trembling piece? Because inside Rosebridge Manor, that was exactly what was happening. While I stood outside the gates, an old father gripping a crushed invitation, another kind of collapse was unfolding behind the polished doors. It was the kind no guest could see, no bride could sense, and no groom could stop. But the walls saw it, the mirrors saw it, and soon the entire wedding would feel it. Oliver Ward, the man my daughter trusted with her future, was unraveling. At first it was small, barely noticeable, a blink too long, a jaw too tight. It started when the event coordinator marched into his suite, heels cracking against the marble like a judge entering a courtroom. She carried a folder pressed so tightly against her chest it looked like a shield. "Mr. Ward, we have an issue." Oliver didn't look up from adjusting his cufflinks. He was rehearsing the smile he wanted to show the world, a smile that said money, confidence, control. The three pillars he built his entire identity on. "What kind of issue?" he asked, still focusing on his reflection. The coordinator took out her phone, tapped a screen, and turned it toward him. The payment for the reception was declined. Oliver froze, only for half a second, but half a second was enough. He straightened slowly, blinked twice, then grabbed the phone from her hand as if the device was lying. "That can't be right," he said, his voice tightening. "Run it again." She nodded and left. He exhaled, rolled his shoulders back, replanted the mask. But the mask didn't sit as smoothly as before. 10 minutes later, the coordinator returned, this time with 2 additional staff members behind her, all wearing the same nervous expression. "We don't want trouble, but trouble is here." Mr. Ward, the second attempt, also failed, and the backup card on file, an emergency payment method. Oliver's throat bobbed. He reached into his wallet, because reaching into a wallet is a gesture of confidence, and flicked out a different sleek, metallic card. "Try this one," he said. Declined. He tried another. Declined. Another. Declined. The staff exchanged glances. Glances that meant whispers were already forming. "Sir," the coordinator said carefully, "we need immediate confirmation of payment. Without it, the staff, caterers, musicians, decorators cannot continue setup." Oliver swallowed so loudly the room heard it. His hands were trembling now, but his voice, oh, he fought to keep that steady. "There must be a bank glitch," he insisted. "Global system error. Happens all the time. I'll call them." It was a terrible lie, but polished men are skilled at terrible lies. The staff left slowly, like people backing away from a dangerous animal they don't want to provoke. As soon as the door shut, Oliver's smile collapsed. He grabbed his phone, the real lifeline, and unlocked it with frantic taps. Messages flooded the screen. One notification sat at the top like a vulture waiting for its prey to stop moving. A message from a block number service. Final warning. £112,000 due today. Failure to pay will escalate consequences immediately. The color drained from his face. This wasn't a gentle reminder. This wasn't a polite nudge. This was the kind of message sent by people who did not care about weddings or reputations. Oliver clenched the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. For one wild second, he looked like he wanted to hurl it across the room. But then he remembered it was the only thing he could still control. He paced the suite, running his fingers through his perfectly styled hair, tugging out of shape. That small detail, the unraveling hair, was the beginning of the end of his polished facade. Meanwhile, across the manor, Emily was worrying about a missing flower arrangement. That's all. Not the venue. Not the payments. Not the debt collector threatening her fiancé. Not the father she rejected at the gate. Just flowers. There's a kind of blindness that comes with desperation. The desperation to build a perfect life. Emily had that blindness, and Oliver fed it, praised it, used it. She thought she was marrying into stability, security, grandeur. She didn't know she was marrying into financial ruin wearing a tailored suit. Back in the groom's suite, Oliver had cornered himself into a silent panic. He opened his banking app. Balance. Pound 47.92. Credit accounts. Frozen. Overdue. Maxed. Family fund. Closed after legal losses. He growled under his breath. Damn it, damn it, damn it. This wedding wasn't just a celebration for him. It was his last, desperate attempt to outrun the wolves at his heels. He needed Emily. He needed the marriage. And most importantly, he needed access to my fortune. The fortune he thought I didn't know he knew about. And the fortune he believed Emily would inherit the moment vows were exchanged. A knock came at his door. Oliver, can I come in? Emily's voice. He jolted, straightened, dragged both hands down his face, and forced a smile wide enough to hurt. 1 second, love. He shoved his phone into his pocket, swept a hand through his hair, rebuilt the mask. When he finally opened the door, he wore that perfect, effortless grin. Emily stepped inside, holding a bouquet in progress. You okay? You look stressed. Just wedding jitters, he said softly, pulling her into a hug he didn't feel. Her eyes softened. She believed him instantly, because trust blinds you long before love ever does. As Emily left, Oliver's phone buzzed again. A new message. Same block number. We know where the wedding is. Do not ignore us again. Oliver's breath caught. This was no longer a secret problem. This was a detonator, and the wedding was the ticking bomb. Outside the gate, I stood unaware of any of this. Still humiliated, still alone, still holding the crushed remains of the invitation my daughter had once proudly mailed me. But something was shifting inside Rosebridge Manor. A fault line cracking, a tremor building, a storm tightening its fist. Because the groom was collapsing, the bride was clueless, and the one man who could shatter everything was still standing outside, just waiting. The wedding wasn't falling apart by accident. It was falling apart by design. And the missing piece, the spark that would ignite the explosion, was me. If you're still watching, let me know in the comments what you think Oliver's next move will be. And make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this channel, Vengetail Dairy. Have you ever watched a ceremony crumble? Not with fire or shouting or storms, but with something far quieter, far deadlier? A silence, a hesitation, a single note that refuses to play. That was how Emily's wedding began to fall apart. Inside Rosebridge Manor's sunlit hall, everything shimmered. Crystal chandeliers cast warm halos across the polished floor. Silk ribbons drifted gently along the rows of seats. Guests whispered among themselves, dazzled by the wealth, the decor, the spectacle. The kind of wedding meant to impress, to intimidate, to prove something. Emily stood at the beginning of the aisle, breathtaking. Her gown glowed ivory in the morning light. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from excitement. She had dreamed of this moment for years, ever since Oliver Ward swept her out of her small-town life and promised her a world of sophistication, status, and security. She had no idea she was walking into the remains of a collapsing empire. Then it began. The pianist lifted his hands over the keys, ready to play the opening melody. But the first chord, the one beautiful note that should have filled the hall, never came. Instead, the music cut, abruptly, like a thread snapped in the middle of a delicate weave. The pianist blinked, confused. He tapped the keys again. Nothing. A whisper of static echoed through the room. Emily frowned. Guests shifted. A few chuckled awkwardly. Then, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. A stuttering pulse that sent shadows leaping across the walls. Murmurs rose like an incoming tide. What's happening? Is this part of the ceremony? Did the power go out? On a day like this? Emily glanced at Oliver. His jaw had tightened. His fingers dug into his cufflinks. He knew exactly what was happening. The estate manager, a tall man with the look of someone who had tolerated enough chaos for one lifetime, stormed down the aisle. His cheeks were flushed with anger. His voice carried across every row. The ceremony cannot continue. Gasps exploded across the hall. Emily's mouth parted. What? Why not? The manager clenched a document in his hand, shaking it for emphasis. Every payment for this event has bounced. Venue, catering, staff, lighting, sound, all of it. We have not received a single valid transaction. The whispering turned into a wave of alarm. Oliver stepped forward, forcing out a confident laugh that didn't match the panic flickering in his eyes. That's impossible. There must be a technical issue. Reset the system. Rerun the cards. We tried, the manager snapped. 3 times. With multiple accounts. Guests leaned in. Eyes widened. The perfect illusion was cracking. Oliver's mask slipped another inch. Emily looked at him, confusion bleeding into fear. Oliver, what's going on? Why would everything bounce? He turned on her sharply. Why are you asking me? You think I did this? He whirled back to the staff. It's your equipment. Your system. Fix it. One of the younger coordinators stepped forward timidly. Sir, it's not our equipment. There's insufficient funds. Oliver's voice rose, sharp and defensive. Then try to back up accounts. Sir, she said gently. They were rejected too. And then it happened. The comment that detonated the entire room. An older woman seated near the front, Oliver's aunt, dressed in a pastel suit and dripping pearls, let out a long, exasperated sigh. This wouldn't be happening, she muttered loudly enough for half the hall to hear, if his family still had money. Silence. Not polite silence. Not stunned silence. A silence sharp enough to cut skin. Emily blinked. Slowly. Her lips moved, but no words came out first. Then she turned, her voice shaking. Wait, what did she just say? Oliver flinched. His aunt turned pale. Guests straightened in their seats, suddenly hungry for the truth. Emily took a step toward Oliver. What does she mean still had money? Oliver, your family is wealthy. You told me. Emily, he warned, teeth clenched. Not now. But it was too late. The dam broke, and the truth surged out like a flood. Oliver snapped. He threw his head back, let out a ragged scream of frustration, and shouted. Fine. Yes. I'm in debt. Yes, my family is broke. Everything is gone. Is that what you want to hear? Gasps rippled like lightning. Emily staggered back a step as if struck. You lied to me? Oliver laughed. A wild, broken sound. Of course I lied. Do you think you'd even look at me if you knew the truth? You wanted a man who could lift you out of your pathetic little life. Her face drained of color. Oliver, he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. And your father, Arthur Hale, he's not some poor seaside nobody. He's worth millions. Millions, Emily. Emily's knees weakened. My father? We're not. Daddy isn't. We've always been. Oliver cut her off with a furious glare. He hid it. He's been hiding it for decades. Your whole simple girl with a simple life act was useless unless he showed up today. I needed him here, so I could secure the money I married you for. Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Her father? Worth millions? Oliver, Marrying her for money? Her own wedding, built on a lie? Oliver stepped closer, jabbing a finger in her face. But you banned him. You kept him away. You ruined my last chance to fix this. The room recoiled in horror. Guests looked at Emily with sympathy, and at Oliver with disgust. The bride, once glowing, now looked shattered, a porcelain figure cracking under the weight of truth. Her dress shimmered, but she no longer did. Her voice, small and breaking, whispered, "What have I done?" Emily's perfect life, the one she reshaped herself to earn, collapsed in the echo of her own scream. No flowers missing, no technical errors, no minor inconvenience. This was a betrayal so deep, so total, it tore the air out of the wedding hall itself. And while chaos swallowed Rosebridge Manor, outside the gate, an old father still stood, unaware that the truth about his life, his sacrifices, his hidden fortune, had just detonated inside. Now the question is, when Arthur Hale learns he wasn't just banned, but targeted, what will a quiet man with a broken heart and a hidden fortune do next? Have you ever thought about the power of quiet love? The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't explode in anger, but simply shows up, steady, patient, unshakable? Because that is what happened next. The wedding hall was chaos incarnate. The guests frozen in shock, murmurs rippling like waves across the polished floors. Oliver Ward was pacing, jaw tight, fingers twitching, half in denial, half in panic. Debt collectors had begun to arrive quietly at the edges of the hall, and his once pristine mask of control was crumbling like dry plaster under a hammer. Emily stood at the aisle, knees trembling, hands clutching the bouquet like it could hold her together. She had just learned the man she trusted with her heart, with her life, was a liar, a fraud, a man who had seen her father not as a parent, but as a bank account. She didn't know where to put her grief first, the betrayal, the humiliation, or the terror that her father had been erased from her life by his manipulations. And then, amidst the whispers and the tension, a voice cut through, not from the bride, not from the groom, not from anyone of influence in the room. A man outside asks if his daughter is okay. Silence. The guests froze. The staff turned toward the double doors. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, trembling, because she recognized the quiet authority in that voice before she saw the figure behind it. And then the doors opened slowly. I walked in. Old suit, old shoes, old heart, trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of everything I had endured to reach this moment. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even Oliver stopped mid-pacing, like the world had shifted on its axis, and he hadn't noticed. Emily's knees buckled. Her tears, long suppressed, finally found their escape. She ran toward me, collapsing into my arms, sobbing, shaking, overwhelmed. I held her, not for judgment, not for anger, not for punishment. I held her because, despite every slight, every humiliation, every heartbreak she had caused me, she was still my daughter. A twist no one saw coming. The estate manager, still clutching a stack of documents detailing unpaid bills, froze mid-step. I released Emily and turned to him calmly. "I'll cover the entire cost," I said. Gasps echoed through the hall. Guests froze mid-breath. Staff blinked as if they were witnessing a magic trick, and Oliver's face went pale, ghost white. His carefully constructed world of deception and control had just been upended by a man who could have made the wedding hall his courtroom and exacted revenge in 1,000 ways, but didn't. "Excuse me?" the manager stammered, checking his spreadsheet again. "I said I'll cover everything. Every payment, every vendor, every staff member. The food, the flowers, the music, everything. Consider it done." The room fell into an uncanny, hushed awe, the kind of silence reserved for moments that feel impossible. Oliver's teeth clenched so hard it seemed like his jaw might break. He had expected humiliation, confrontation, maybe even subtle revenge, but this calm, almost serene generosity was a blow far sharper than any shouting match. The emotional release. Emily's sobs slowed as she looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, her hands clutching mine. "Dad, I don't deserve this," she whispered. I shook my head gently. "Kindness is not a reward for perfection," I said, voice steady but deep with emotion. "It's a reminder that you can change." She looked up at me, confusion and relief warring in her gaze. The kind of relief that comes only when someone you've believed abandoned you shows up, not with revenge but with love. The staff began to restart the music softly, piano notes weaving through the hall like fragile hope. Guests slowly returned to their seats, unsure how to react. Some dabbed tears from their eyes. Some whispered to one another, marveling at the quiet strength of a father who had been humiliated, banned, and erased, yet still held his heart open for the child who had once hurt him. And then all eyes returned to the center of the room, to the couple at the aisle. The bride's choice. Emily turned slowly, still holding back tears, toward Oliver. Her voice, though fragile, carried the weight of clarity and newfound strength. "I won't marry a man who sees my father as a wallet," she said, her words sharp but controlled, slicing through the remnants of Oliver's arrogance. "And I won't marry a man who never loved me." She held out the ring, hands shaking but with conviction. Oliver recoiled. He snarled a low, frustrated sound. He lunged forward, attempting to reclaim control. But the debt collectors at the edges of the hall quietly stepped in, letting him know that his financial nightmare had finally caught up with him. Emily didn't waver. She had seen the truth, and it burned brighter than any illusion of love he had woven. And there I stood, still calm, still composed, still the father he thought he could push away without consequence. I had not come for revenge. I had not come for theatrics. I had come because love, pure, unwavering, patient love, was more powerful than any scheme, any lie, any manipulation. The villain's horror. Oliver's face twisted in disbelief, rage, and terror. He had expected humiliation, perhaps a confrontation, but not this. Not the impossibility of someone stepping in calmly and solving every problem he had created, dismantling every advantage he thought he had. He realized, far too late, that his entire strategy had been predicated on me being irrelevant. That my fortune, my presence, my very self were obstacles to be removed, erased, hidden. And now, standing before him, I was neither erased nor removed. I was his undoing, and I had not lifted a finger in vengeance. He opened his mouth to speak, to argue, to reclaim his authority. But all that came out was a choke breath. The debt collector's presence, my calm authority, and Emily's unwavering gaze rendered him powerless. For the first time, he realized that cruelty could be defeated not with retaliation, but with compassion. And that truth hurt far more than confrontation ever could. The moment everyone witnessed, the staff began to reset tables. Music swelled once more, and the guests leaned forward, witnessing a moment that felt impossible. An elderly man, humiliated and hurt, paying for the wedding of the daughter who once turned him away. A bride, crying and relieved, reclaiming her own agency. A groom, undone, powerless, and stripped of all pretense. It was a tableau of morality in shades of gray. Not revenge, not triumph, not humiliation, but something rarer, justice disguised as love. And in the center of it all, Emily looked at me and whispered, tears streaming freely, "Dad, I'm so sorry. For everything." I shook my head gently. It's never about being perfect. It's about knowing what's right, even when it's hard. The cliffhanger moment. The music played. Guests clutched programs, unsure whether to cheer or cry. But the wedding, Emily's wedding, was over. Not ceremonially, not in decorum, not in the way the world expected. The choice lay in her hands. Would she proceed with the man who had lied, manipulated, and married her for profit? Or would she walk away, reclaiming her life, her heart, and the truth her father had always protected her with? And the father, once humiliated at the gates, erased from the moment, stood quietly, knowing that the next choice would define everything. Because kindness had already spoken louder than money, control, or deceit. And the world, watching this unfold, held its breath. If you're on the edge of your seat, wondering what Emily will do next, and how Oliver will respond now that his lies have exploded, drop a comment, like, and subscribe to Vengetail Dairy. The story isn't over. The next will reveal the consequences of choosing love over greed, and you won't want to miss a second. The sound of sirens echoed faintly through the estate as Oliver Ward was escorted away. He screamed, cursed, pointed fingers at staff, at debt collectors, at the world, but most importantly, at anyone who might have the power to see him for what he really was. He blamed everyone but himself. But no one listened anymore. The wedding was canceled, not because of a minor mistake, not because of a miscommunication, not because of bad luck. It was canceled because the truth had arrived. And truth has a way of demolishing carefully constructed illusions. Guests drifted from their seats, murmuring in disbelief, still absorbing the spectacle of the man they had admired. The groom who promised stability, wealth, and love, being exposed as a fraud, a manipulator, and a liar. Oliver's family, or what remained of their pride, had crumbled in the wake of the debt notices and the revelation of his desperate ambitions. By the end of the day, he was left with nothing but the echo of his own failures. Not only had he lost Emily, the woman he married for profit, but the illusion of his wealth, control, and power had been stripped bare before every witness. And for once in his life, he could not talk his way out of it. The calm after the storm. Outside the ruins of what was supposed to be a perfect day, the air was heavy with disbelief and tentative relief. Emily stood at the edge of the hall, still trembling, still holding the bouquet that had been intended for a celebration, now turned cautionary tale. I walked up beside her. My presence, quiet and steady, was the anchor she didn't know she needed. She leaned against me, letting herself collapse into a weight of emotion she had held back for years. Regret, fear, shame, and relief all tangled together in a messy knot. We didn't speak immediately. Words weren't necessary. We simply walked. Scarborough's cliffs waited, mist curling off the North Sea like a soft shroud, waves crashing below in rhythmic insistence, a reminder that the world continued even when human plans failed spectacularly. It became our sanctuary, rebuilding trust slowly. Over the following weeks, Emily and I rebuilt something we had both thought lost. Long walks along the seaside, conversations that went deep into the night, laughter mingled with tears, stories shared, fears voiced, regrets acknowledged. She told me about the guilt she had carried, the anger she had felt toward me for banning me from her wedding, the day she had envisioned as perfect but had instead become a nightmare. "Dad," she whispered one evening, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face, "I banned you from the happiest day of my life. But it became the worst day because you weren't there." I held her hands in mine, rough, calloused hands that had known loss, fear, and hardship. "Emily," I said softly, "love is not about flawless choices. It's about coming home after the bad ones." That night, she cried freely, the grief of years spilling out. And I held her as I'd held her when she was a child, steady, patient, and unwavering. Oliver's downfall completed. Meanwhile, Oliver's life continued to unravel in ways that were almost poetic in their justice. The debt collectors followed him from city to city, creditors pressing for every pound he owed. His once pristine image in London society was ruined. Invitations rescinded. Friendships vanished. Professional connections, forged over years of careful appearances, dissolved overnight. He had spent a lifetime believing that appearances, charm, and manipulation could buy him security, influence, and love. But when confronted with the unvarnished truth, none of it held. He became a cautionary tale, whispered about in polite society. The man who married for money, lost everything in a day, and had nothing left to show for it but a shattered ego and a debt ledger. And yet, Oliver's ruin was not what gave me satisfaction. It was a natural consequence of his own choices, the poetic justice of a man undone by the greed and deceit he nurtured. No need for vengeance. No need for cruelty. The world simply balanced itself. The healing begins. Back in Scarborough, Emily and I continue to repair our bond. It wasn't instantaneous. Trust takes time to rebuild. But it grew, slowly, persistently, like ivy on an old wall, softening the cracks, covering the scars, and reminding both of us that something broken can still be beautiful when nurtured. We laughed more. We cried more. We spoke about her dreams, not the ones dictated by someone else's ambition, but her own. We spoke about mine, not the regrets, but the moments that had shaped who I was. And over time, she grew stronger, honest, grounded, kind. Months passed, and in those months, Emily discovered someone who treated her with the respect, care, and love that Oliver had never known how to provide. When she told me about him, I didn't need to ask questions. I simply listened, smiled quietly, and knew that her heart, once manipulated and broken, had found its way to someone who deserved it. The true test of redemption. The day came when Emily would marry again, this time to a man who saw her for who she was, not for what she could bring. And when she asked me to walk her down the aisle, I felt a quiet, profound sense of completion. Not because she had earned forgiveness, not because she had been perfect, but because she had learned humility, truth, and love. The aisle stretched before us, and as we walked, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The loss of her mother, the grief that separated us, The lies of a man who sought to profit from her life, the humiliation of a wedding gone wrong, and the moment when kindness, the quiet, patient, unwavering kind, had shattered illusions more powerfully than any confrontation could. The greatest revenge is transformation. I realized then that sometimes the sharpest blade is not vengeance. The greatest triumph is not destruction. The sweetest satisfaction is watching someone rise, not burn, through truth, humility, and the courage to reclaim their life. Oliver had burned himself. Emily had grown, and I had stayed true to the values that mattered most. Forgiveness, it turns out, is not weakness. It is power. It is clarity. It is the weapon that pierces greed, deceit, and arrogance in ways no anger ever could. And in that moment, walking Emily down the aisle, watching her eyes light up with genuine joy, I understood the lesson fully. Sometimes, the most extraordinary justice is letting love and kindness guide the way. Closing emotional loop. Emily smiled up at me as we reached the front of the hall. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you. For everything. For never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." I patted her hand gently. "You never needed to earn it. You just needed to come home." The guests, witnesses to the transformation, murmured their approval. Some teared up, some smiled in awe. All understood that the story they had just witnessed was not about wealth, or weddings, or mistakes, but about redemption, love, and the extraordinary power of compassion. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew Oliver's story would serve as a warning for years to come. The man who sought to manipulate life through greed and deceit would find himself undone, not by violence, not by vengeance, but by the simple, unshakable truths of honesty and human decency. A final message to the audience. And so ends this story of our tale. A story of betrayal, secrecy, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. If this story touched you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, the triumph, don't just watch silently. Like, comment, and subscribe to Vengetail Dairy. Share your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Or in Arthur's? Because stories like these aren't just entertainment. They remind us that the sharpest blade isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's love. And sometimes it's forgiveness.